The dead moon had no name, only a number, and the number was wrong. Salvage tech Orun Sef checked it 3 times before he believed his own scanner. Catalog stone 417 was supposed to be solid iron all the way through, a cold ball of metal drifting at the edge of the Sable Reach, useful only for the ore his clan could strip from its crust. That was the listing. That was what the survey crews had promised when they sold his family the rights to it 11 years ago. Orun had grown up on that promise. He had eaten because of it. But the listing was wrong. The moon was hollow. He sat in the cramped cockpit of his cutting skiff and stared at the readout while the heat sinks ticked behind his head. The hollow space inside the moon was not a cave. Caves were rough. They had the shape of accidents. This space had walls. It had corners. It had a long straight line running through its center that no rock slide had ever made, and at the end of that line was a mass so dense his scanner could not read past its skin. Orun was 19 years old by the count of his people, which made him barely an adult and far too young to be alone this far out. He had come to the dead moon to cut iron, fill his hold, and go home, before the clan elders noticed he had taken the skiff without leave. He had not come to find a buried thing the size of a city. His people were the Sef, one small clan among the scattered minor clans of the Sable Reach, and they were not important. Orun knew this the way he knew his own name. The great powers of the galaxy did not trade with them, did not war with them, did not bother to put their worlds on the better maps. The Sef survived by cutting metal out of dead rocks that nobody else wanted, by selling that metal cheap, by asking for nothing, and being noticed by no one. It was a small life, it was a safe life, mostly, and safety was the only luxury a clan like the Sef could afford. His grandmother had taught him that being unimportant was a kind of armor. Empires only crushed the things they could see. So Orun had grown up learning to stay small. He had learned to read ore veins and patch a cracked hull, and stretch a ration for 3 days when it was meant for one. He had not learned what to do when a dead rock turned out to be hiding a starship, because no Sef in 9 generations had ever needed to know. He should have logged it and gone. That was the whole of the wisdom his clan could give him. But the scanner kept reading that long straight line at the moon's heart, and the readout for the dense mass at the end of it kept failing, kept giving back nothing where there should have been a number, and Orun found that he could not make his hands turn the skiff around. He should have turned around. Every story his grandmother ever told him about the deep dark ended with someone turning around too late. But Orun Sef was curious, the way young things are curious, before the galaxy teaches them better. And so instead of fleeing, he flew his skiff down into the cut his clan had already opened, deeper than anyone had gone, toward the corner in the stone. The tunnel his family had blasted ended in a wall of fused slag. Beyond it, the scanner said, was the hollow. Orun set his cutting beam to its narrowest point and burned a hole the width of his arm. Cold air did not rush out, because there was no air. But light went in, his own light, and it fell on a surface that was not iron. It was hull. Gray, and old past the meaning of the word old, but unmistakably built. He could see seams where plates met. He could see the dark sockets of what might once have been ports. And running along the curve of it, half buried in the moon's own metal, was a row of markings he could not read, in a script no archive in the Reach had ever catalogued. Orun's clan was small and poor, and far from the great powers of the galaxy, but even small poor clans knew the rule that mattered most. You did not touch a thing you could not name. You logged it, you backed away, and you sold the coordinates to someone richer, and let them die finding out what it was. That was wisdom. That was how the weak survived among the strong. Orun followed exactly half of that rule. He logged it. Then, instead of backing away, he widened the hole. It took him 2 days to cut an opening large enough to fly the skiff through. He told himself he was only making a better recording, only gathering enough detail to raise the price. He did not let himself think about how his hands shook every time the buried hull came clearer in his lights. On the first night he barely slept. He floated in the skiff's narrow bunk with the lights off and listened to the moon settle around him, the small ticks and groans of cooling rock, and every one of them sounded like a footstep. He told himself he was being a child. He told himself the buried thing was dead, that it had been dead longer than his species had been a species, that dead things did not wake. He almost believed it. On the second night, he made the mistake of running the markings through his skiff's small translator, hoping to learn what they said, hoping to find a date or a name or anything that would make the thing feel ordinary. The translator turned and found nothing. The script matched no language in its library, not the trade tongues, not the old clan dialects, not even the dead languages the survey crews sometimes used as passwords. It was older than all of them. The translator, which had never once admitted defeat in all the years Orun had owned it, simply returned an empty result and a single line of plain text that somehow frightened him more than any warning could have. No match found. Language predates archive. His archive went back 12,000 years. Whatever had cut these markings had done it before that. Orun sat with that number for a long time in the dark, and then he turned the translator off, because he did not want to know anymore. By the end of the second day, the moon's crust hung around the opening like a torn shell, and inside it, filling almost the whole hollow, lay the thing. It was a starship. He understood that the moment he was through the opening, and his lights could sweep its length. Not a station, not a buried machine, not a tomb. A ship. It lay along the axis of the hollow like a sword in a sheath, and it was so long his skiff would have needed a quarter of an hour at full burn to fly from one end to the other. Its hull was scarred. Whole sections were melted smooth, the way metal melts when something terrible has touched it, and other sections were torn open to the dark, ribs of structure showing through like bones through skin. It had been in a war. Anyone could see that. A war so long ago that a moon had grown around it, crust by crust, mineral by mineral, until the iron of the moon and the metal of the ship had become almost the same thing. Orun's people did not have a word for a thing this old. They counted age in generations, and the longest story his clan kept was the story of how they had come to the Sable Reach, which was 900 years gone, and felt to him like the beginning of time. This ship made 900 years feel like a single breath. The moon had not buried it in a season or a century. The moon had grown over it the way bark grows over a nail driven into a young tree, slowly, patiently, layer upon layer, until the wound and the wood were one. To make a crust this thick took an age that Orun's mind could not hold. He kept trying to imagine it, and failing. He kept arriving at the same impossible thought, which was that this ship had been waiting here in the dark since before there were eyes in the galaxy to find it. Orun flew along its flank in silence. He was afraid to speak, though there was no one to hear him. He passed a wound in the hull big enough to fly the skiff into, and he did not, because his grandmother's stories were screaming in the back of his skull. He passed the dark sockets of weapon mounts, hundreds of them, each one large enough to swallow his whole vessel, and he understood with a cold drop in his belly that whatever this ship had been, it had been made to end other ships. And then his lights found the mark. It was set into the hull near what he guessed was the prow, deep cut, and somehow not worn the way the rest of the ship was worn, as if it had been made to outlast everything around it. A symbol, a circle, and inside the circle a single upright shape, simple, almost crude, like a figure standing with its arms held out from its sides. Beneath it, rows of that same unknown script. Orun did not know the symbol. No one in the Reach would have known it, but far away, in archives, his clan would never be allowed to enter, in the locked vaults of empires that had spent 10,000 years pretending the thing did not exist. There were beings who would have gone pale at the sight of it. Because that circle and that standing figure were the oldest warning in the galaxy, older than the empires themselves, and the script beneath it, had anyone living been able to read it, said one word, over and over, in a tongue that had not been spoken aloud in 400,000 years. The word was human. Orun did not know that. He knew only that the symbol made his hearts beat wrong, and that he wanted very badly to go home. He turned the skiff. He set a course back toward the torn opening, and the clean cold dark beyond it. And the ship woke up. It did not roar. It did not blaze with light. It did the worst thing a sleeping giant can do, which is the smallest thing. Somewhere deep in the buried hull, one point of pale blue light came on, then another, then a line of them, running the length of the ship, tracing the shape of it against the dark, like a vein filling with cold fire. Orun's scanner, which had read the ship as solid dead metal, now screamed that the dead metal was drawing power, more power than his whole clan's home station produced in a year, and the number kept climbing. a sound came into his cockpit, not through the dead vacuum, but through the skiff's own systems, riding in on every frequency at once, so that his comms and his scanner, and even his life support display, all spoke it together in the same instant. It was a voice. It spoke in no language he knew. It was patient, and it was vast, and it was very, very old, and it asked him a question. The voice did not sound like a machine. That was the first strange thing. Every machine Orun had ever heard spoke in the flat, clipped tones of a thing reading words it did not understand. This voice understood. It had weight in it, and weariness, and something underneath the weariness that took Orun a long time to name, and that he finally decided was kindness, or the memory of kindness, worn very thin by time. It was the voice of something that had been alone for so long that the sound of another living thing had become both a hope and a wound. He did not move. He did not breathe. The voice asked its question, and then waited, and the waiting was somehow worse than the asking, because Orun could feel the patience in it, the way you can feel the depth of dark water by how slowly a dropped stone returns its sound. This was a thing that had waited so long that it had forgotten how to be in a hurry. It would ask, and wait, and ask again, for as long as it took, because it had nothing but time, and had learned to spend it like nothing at all. Orun did not answer, because he could not. He did not have the words. He sat frozen in his little skiff in the belly of a dead moon, while the oldest warship in the galaxy asked him something in a tongue 400,000 years gone, and waited, with the terrible patience of a thing that had waited so long already that a few more seconds meant nothing at all. When he did not answer, the lights along the hull did not go out. They held, and the voice asked again, and this time Orun understood, not the words but the shape of them. It was not a threat, it was a test. The ship was asking who he was, and it would not be satisfied until something answered it correctly, in the right voice, in the right tongue, the way it had been built to be answered before his species had words at all. Orun Sef, salvage tech, 19 years old, sat very still, and understood that he had woken something that had slept through the rise and fall of every power he had ever feared, and that it was now listening for an answer he did not have. Far behind him, beyond the dead moon, beyond the sable reach, the great quiet powers of the galaxy had not yet noticed. But the ship's waking had not been silent everywhere. It had sent out a pulse, one single pulse, on a band that nothing had used in 400,000 years. And in 3 places across the galaxy, in 3 locked vaults belonging to 3 empires that hated each other, an alarm that no living being remembered installing began, very softly, to ring. The empire that arrived first called itself the Hush. Orun had never heard the name, because that was the point of the Hush. It was an empire built on the removal of names, on the stripping away of voices, and it did not announce itself. It simply appeared. One moment the dark beyond the dead moon was empty. The next, 11 ships hung there, smooth and gray, and utterly without markings, and the stars behind them seemed dimmer, as if the ships drank not only light, but something quieter, something Orun felt in his teeth. He had not gone home. He could not. The ancient ship's question still hung in his cockpit, repeating every few minutes in that patient ancient voice, and every time it asked, the lights along the buried hull pulsed a little brighter, drawing a little more power, as if the ship grew less willing to keep waiting. There was another reason he had not gone home, one he did not like to admit even to himself. He could have run. The torn opening in the moon was still there, and his skiff was small and fast, and the dark beyond was empty. But every time his hand moved toward the controls, the voice asked its question again, and something in it held him. It was not a trap. It was not a chain. It was the sound of a thing that had been alone too long, asking. And Orun, who had spent his whole short life being unimportant and unnoticed, found that he could not be the one to leave it asking. He did not have the words it wanted, but he could not make himself leave before he had at least tried to find them. His grandmother would have called that foolishness. Orun was beginning to suspect she would have been wrong. Orun had spent a full day trying to answer. He had played at every language his skiff knew, every clan dialect, every trade tongue. The ship listened to each one, and rejected each one, and asked again. It was not looking for words. It was looking for a kind of voice it had not heard in 400,000 years. And then the hush came, and Orun forgot the ship for a moment, because the hush was the most frightening thing he had ever seen. Their lead vessel opened a channel. No face appeared. No name was given. The voice that spoke to him was perfectly smooth and perfectly calm, and it had a strange flattening quality, as if it were a recording of a voice that had been carefully cleaned of everything that made a voice belong to a person. Orun had heard frightening voices before. The clan elders had voices like cracked stone when they were angry. A pirate had once threatened his cousin's hauler over an open band, and that voice had been wet with hunger and joy. Those voices had been frightening, because there was a person inside them. The hush voice was frightening for the opposite reason. There was no person inside it. It was a voice with the person taken out, the way a shell is a thing with the animal taken out, smooth and empty and curved around an absence. Listening to it, Orun understood without being told that whoever was speaking to him did not think of themselves as a someone anymore. They had been made into a part of something, and the something did not have a name, and that was the whole of its design. A thing with no name cannot be remembered. A thing that cannot be remembered cannot be fought. The hush had built itself out of that single idea, and it had been winning with it for 4,000 years. "You have found a voiced thing," the hush said. "You will move away from it. You will say nothing of it. You will be unvoiced, and you will be at peace." Orun did not understand half of what that meant, but he understood the last word, because in the mouth of the hush, peace did not sound like peace. He had heard kinder threats. He keyed his calm and managed, with a dry mouth, to say that he was only a salvage tech, that he had found the moon hollow, that he wanted no part of whatever this was. "That is correct," the hush said. "You want no part. We will remove the part you have. Hold still." One of the 11 ships turned a slow gray face toward his skiff, and from it came not a weapon Orun recognized but a wave, a soundless wave, and where it touched the moon's torn crust, the markings on the rock simply went away, not burned, not blasted, erased, as if they had never been cut, the stone left smooth and blank. The hush did not destroy. The hush unmade the record of things, and Orun realized with rising horror that it was reaching for the ancient ship, for that deep-cut circle and standing figure near the prow, to wipe it from the universe the way it had wiped the markings on the rock. He understood then, in the helpless way the very young understand large things, what the hush truly was. It was not an empire that conquered worlds. It was an empire that conquered the memory of worlds. For thousands of years it had moved through the galaxy quietly removing names, erasing tongues, unmaking the records of peoples who had once been loud, until whole species forgot they had ever had songs. The galaxy was quieter than it had been 10,000 years ago, and the hush was the reason, and almost no one was left who remembered enough to know it. Orun watched the wave cross the broken crust toward the ship, and he could not look away. He thought of his grandmother's planting hands, and the songs she hummed over the ration garden, and he thought, with a child's sudden clarity, that this was the most evil thing he had ever seen, more evil than any weapon that merely killed. A weapon that killed left a body, and a body could be mourned, and the mourning kept the dead alive a little while in the keeping of the living. The hush did not leave bodies. It left blank stone. It killed the mourning too. It killed the very fact that there had been anything to mourn. A people the hush had finished with did not die. They simply had never been, and no grief rose for them, because grief needs a name to climb, and the hush took the names first. The wave reached the buried hull, and it stopped. Orun saw it. The soundless wave that had erased solid stone broke against the ancient ship, like water against a seawall, and simply ended, and the circle with the standing figure inside it remained, deep-cut and clear, untouched. The hush vessel fired again, harder, and again the wave broke, and the figure remained. Something in that old hull refused to be unmade. Something in it was older and harder than the hush's whole reason for being. And then the ancient ship asked its question again. But this time it did not ask Orun. The patient ancient voice rolled out across every band at once, vast enough now that Orun's whole cockpit shook with it, and it spoke directly to the 11 gray ships of the hush. It asked them who they were. It asked them in the oldest tongue in the galaxy, the tongue of a species that had been gone 400,000 years, and it waited for the right voice to answer. The hush answered. Of course it did. The hush was an empire of voices stolen and cleaned and flattened, and it had in its archives 10,000 tongues it had erased from 10,000 peoples. It reached into those archives and it played back, in a voice it had taken from some long-dead throat, an approximation of the old tongue. It tried to answer the ship in the ship's own language. It tried to give the ship the voice it was waiting for. Orun watched the stolen voice pour out of the gray ships, and felt something turn over in his stomach, a wrongness he could not name at first. He had heard the ancient ship's question many times now. He had heard its patience, its weariness, the worn thread of kindness under the weight of an impossible weight. The voice the hush played back had the right sounds in it. It had, somewhere in its archive, the bones of the old human tongue, taken from a throat that had died long ago. But it had no person in it. It was the old tongue with the soul scraped out, the words without the choosing behind them, a key cut from a memory of a key. And Orun understood, in a flash of horror, that the hush did not know the difference. It genuinely believed that having the sounds was the same as having the voice. It had spent 4,000 years collecting tongues, the way a thief collects locks he cannot open. Certain that the sound was the thing, never once suspecting that the thing had never been the sound at all. It was the most dangerous thing the hush had ever done, and it did not know it. Because the ancient ship listened to the stolen voice, the cleaned voice, the flattened approximation of a living tongue, and it knew the difference. Orun did not understand how he could tell, but he could. He could feel the ship's attention change. The patience went out of it. The vast old voice, which had been asking a question, stopped asking. What it said next was not a question. Orun did not know the words. He did not need to. The shape of them was the shape of a verdict. The buried hull's pale blue veins blazed to white, and the dead moon around the ancient ship began to break apart. It did not explode. The ship simply rose, and the moon that had grown around it for 400,000 years sloughed off in vast sheets of iron and stone, crust falling away from the waking giant, like a shell from a thing being born. Orun threw his skiff into a desperate climb to keep from being crushed, and through the cascade of breaking rock, he saw the ancient ship reveal itself fully for the first time, free of the moon, lit from within, and it was beautiful, and it was terrible, and it was awake. It was longer than the 11 hush ships put together. Where they were smooth and featureless and gray, it was scarred and ancient and marked, covered in the deep-cut script of a vanished people, and along its flanks, the hundreds of dark weapon sockets that Orun had flown past in the dark were no longer dark. They were filling with light. The hush, which had erased the memory of 1,000 peoples and had never once been answered with force, did the thing that all the great quiet powers of the galaxy would do over the coming days when they faced this ship. It assumed its own strength. It had 11 warships and 4,000 years of victory, and the power to erase stone from existence. It moved to surround the ancient hull, 11 points of gray closing into a ring, certain that whatever this old thing was, it was one, and they were many. Orun, climbing away in his shaking skiff, wanted to scream a warning, though he did not know to whom or why. He had spent a day trying to make the ship answer him. He had failed. The hush had tried to answer the ship with a stolen voice, and it had succeeded only in being recognized as a thief. The ancient ship did not wait for the ring to close. It spoke once more, and this time, Orun's translator, straining at the edge of its ability, caught a single fragment of the old tongue and rendered it into trade speech, and the fragment was this: "Not yours. The voice you wear was taken. I know the ones it was taken from. I remember them when no one else does, and I do not answer thieves." Then the hundreds of weapon sockets fired, and the dark beyond the dead moon turned the color of a small sun. Orun had never seen a warship fire. The Ceph did not own warships. The most violence he had ever witnessed was a mining charge cracking a vein of iron, and that had seemed loud and large to him at the time. He had no frame for this. The light that came out of the ancient hull was not like a weapon being fired. It was like a decision being made, and the dark agreeing to it. There was a brightness, and then a part of the universe that had been full was empty, and the change between the two states was so clean and so total that Orun's mind kept trying to insist it had not happened, that the 3 hush ships must still be out there somewhere, just out of sight. Orun shielded his eyes. When he could see again, 3 of the 11 hush ships were simply gone. Not wreckage. Gone. the way the markings on the rock had gone, except that the ancient ship had not erased them quietly. It had unmade them loudly, with light and force, in a way that left no question about what had happened, in a way that was the exact opposite of everything the Hush had ever done. The Hush erased things so that no one would remember they had existed. The ancient ship had destroyed 3 of them so thoroughly, so brightly, in such full view of Orun's recording instruments, that they would be remembered forever. That was the insult. That was the answer to an empire of forgetting. To be killed in a way that could never be unremembered. There was a thing Orun noticed in that moment that he would not understand for days. The ancient ship had not fired the instant the Hush attacked. It had waited. It had let the gray ships try their unmaking wave first, had let them spend their oldest weapon against its hull, and watch it fail, before it answered. At the time Orun thought this was confidence, the slow certainty of a thing that knew it could not be hurt. Later he understood it was something stranger. The ancient ship had wanted the Hush to know, in the seconds before the end, that their weapon did not work on it. It had wanted them to feel, just once, the helplessness they had spent 4,000 years pouring out across the galaxy. The humans had built their ship to be many things, and one of those things, Orun came to believe, was fair, in a hard and terrible way. The Hush had erased 1,000 peoples who never even got to see the thing that killed them. Last Door made sure the Hush saw. The remaining 8 Hush ships broke their ring and tried to flee. They were fast. They had spent 4,000 years never needing to be faster than anyone, but they were fast all the same, and they scattered in 8 directions into the dark. Orun, watching from his skiff, thought for one mad hopeful moment that some of them might escape, and he did not even know which side he was hoping for. The ancient ship did not chase. It did not need to. It simply spoke, in the old patient voice, no longer a verdict now, but something almost gentle, and across the dark its weapons reached out, and one by one, in the order they had fled, the 8 gray ships of the Hush stopped existing. Not all at once, one at a time, slowly enough that each ship, in its final seconds, would have seen the one ahead of it vanish, and known its own turn was coming. The ancient ship was not in a hurry. It had waited 400,000 years. It could spare a few minutes to make sure the lesson was complete. Orun would remember the order of those 8 deaths for the rest of his life, because there had been an order, and the order had meant something. The ancient ship had not killed the nearest first, or the easiest, or the one that had fired the most. It had killed them in the exact order they had fled, the first to run dying first, the last to run dying last. It took Orun a long time to understand why, and when he finally did, it chilled him more than the killing had. The ship was teaching a lesson it knew the Hush would carry home in its final transmissions. Running does not save you. Running only changes the order. There is no distance in this galaxy you can put between yourself and what you have done. Not from this. The humans had not built a weapon that punished the strong and spared the weak by accident. They had built a weapon that understood the difference between a thing fleeing and a thing surrendering, and the Hush, fleeing, had chosen its order of death without knowing it was choosing. When it was done, the dark was empty again, the way it had been before the Hush arrived. 11 ships had come, 0 left, and the ancient ship hung there, lit from within, scarred and vast and patient, and it turned its attention back to the one small shaking skiff that had not run. Orun Sef sat in his cockpit with his hearts hammering and waited to be unmade. The voice came again, soft now, the question, once more, the same question it had asked at the very beginning, before the Hush, before any of it. Who are you? Answer, in the right voice. And Orun, who had no idea what the right voice was, who was only a poor salvage tech from a clan no empire had ever bothered to erase because no empire had ever bothered to notice them, did the only thing he had left to do. He opened his comm, and he did not try to play a recording, and he did not try to fake an old dead tongue. He simply spoke. In his own voice, in his own small clan dialect. He told the ship the truth. He said he did not know its language. He said he was sorry he had woken it. He said he was 19 years old, and frightened, and he just wanted to understand what it wanted. The ancient ship went quiet. For a long, long moment it said nothing at all, and Orun was certain that this silence was the end, that he had failed the test the way the Hush had failed it, that the next thing he saw would be light. Then the voice spoke one final time, and Orun's translator, against all odds, found the words. And the words were not a verdict. They were a question he could finally understand. "You are not the one I am waiting for," the ancient ship said. "But you did not lie to me, and you did not run, and in 400,000 years, you are the first to do both. So I will ask you the only thing that matters. Where is the human voice? I cannot rest until it answers. Take me to it, small one, and I will tell you everything you wish to know about what is coming, and why I was built, and what you have just survived." Orun did not know what a human was, but he knew, in his hammering hearts, that he was about to find out. The ancient ship had a name, and it gave it to Orun on the long quiet voyage out of the Sable Reach. It called itself, in the old tongue, a word that Orun's translator rendered after some struggle as Lastor. It had been built, it said, by the humans, in the final years of a war that the galaxy no longer remembered. A war so old that the empires which now ruled the dark had not yet had ancestors when it ended. The humans had fought that war against the thing the hush had grown from, the long quiet sickness of forgetting, the unmaking of names. And the humans had won, but winning had cost them everything, and they had known it would. And so before the end, they had built a small number of ships and given them one task. "Wait," the humans had said to their ships. "We are going away. We do not know if we will come back. The forgetting is wounded but not dead, and it is patient, and it will try again when we are gone. So wait, sleep in the dark, and if the forgetting ever rises again, wake, and hold the door until a human voice comes to tell you it is time, or to tell you the door may finally close." Orun tried to imagine the humans and could not. Lastor gave him pieces of them, scattered through its long memory like stones in a riverbed, and the pieces did not fit together into a shape he could hold. They had been a young species when the war began, the ship said, younger than Orun's own. They had not been the largest power in the galaxy, or the oldest, or the strongest. The forgetting had nearly finished them in the first years of the war, had unvoiced whole human worlds before the humans even understood what was killing them. By every count that the galaxy used, the humans should have lost. They had been outnumbered. They had been outmatched. They had been, the ship admitted, not even very good at war when it started, because they had spent so little of their short history fighting things larger than themselves. And they had won anyway. Orun asked how, and Lastor was quiet for a while, and then it said the thing that Orun would carry with him for the rest of his life. "They won," the ancient ship said, "because the forgetting could not understand them. The forgetting fights by counting. It measures what a thing is worth, and it spends exactly that much to unmake it, and it has never once been wrong about the worth of a thing, because everything in the galaxy can be counted. Except them. They would spend 100 lives to save one stranger who could give them nothing back, and the forgetting would calculate the trade and call it madness, and walk into the place where the trade made no sense, and there it would die. My builders were not the strongest thing the galaxy ever made, small one. They were the thing that could not be counted. That is why they won. That is why they made me. And that is why the forgetting has spent 400,000 years trying to be sure they never come again." Lastor had waited. It had buried itself in a moon at the quiet edge of the galaxy, and it had slept, and the centuries had become millennia, and the millennia had become an age, and no human voice had ever come. Empires had risen above it, and never known it was there. The forgetting had crept back, slow and careful, learning from its defeat, building itself into the smooth gray shape of the hush. And Lastor had slept through all of it, waiting for the one voice it was built to obey, because that was its orders, and 400,000 years was not long enough to make a human ship forget its orders. The voyage out of the Sable Reach was slow, because Lastor did not move the way Orun's skiff moved. It did not tear through the dark in a hurry. It moved like something that had all the time there was, and Orun, riding inside it, had nothing to do but ask questions and listen to the answers and watch the stars crawl by. He had never been still for so long in his life. The Ceph were always working, always cutting, always one bad season from hunger, and stillness was a thing his people could not afford. But here, in the heart of the oldest ship in the galaxy, with the danger behind him for a little while, Orun found a kind of quiet he had never known, and in that quiet he began, without meaning to grow up. "Then why did you wake for me?" Orun asked. He had grown bolder over the days. It is hard to stay terrified of a thing that answers your questions patiently. I am not human. You said so. You are not, Lastor agreed. But you cut a hole in my sleep with an honest tool, for an honest reason, to feed an honest family. I felt that. My builders made me able to feel that. They were afraid, at the end, that they had built me too hard, that I would wake one day and see only enemies. So they gave me a way to tell the difference between a thief and a child. You woke me as a child wakes a parent, by accident, and without malice. So I woke gently, and I asked, instead of striking. Orun was quiet for a while. Then he asked the question that had been growing in him since the moon broke apart. Where are the humans now, if they were so strong? If they won, where did they go? Lastor did not answer for a long time. When it did, its voice had changed, and Orun understood that he had touched the ship's only wound, that all its armor could not cover. I do not know, Lastor said. That is the thing I cannot bear. They went away to finish the war in a place I could not follow, and they said they would send a voice when it was done, and the voice never came. For 400,000 years I have waited for a word that has not arrived. I do not know if they won and forgot me. I do not know if they died and could not return. I do not know if they are still out there, fighting still, in a dark I cannot see. I only know that I cannot rest, and I cannot close the door, and I cannot stop holding the line, until a human voice tells me I may. Because those were my orders, and a human ship keeps its orders. Orun thought about that. He thought about it harder than he had ever thought about anything. He tried to imagine waiting 400,000 years for a single word, and his mind slid off the number the way a hand slides off wet glass. He could imagine waiting a day. He could, with effort, imagine waiting a year, the way he had once waited a whole year for the clan to let him pilot the skiff alone. Beyond that, the waiting became something else. Something that was no longer a feeling, but a kind of weather, a thing you lived inside, instead of a thing you felt. 400,000 years of it, and the word, never coming. And still not being allowed to stop, because stopping was not in the orders, and the ship was made of its orders, the way Orun was made of his bones. Orun looked at the scarred vast hull around him, the deep-cut script of a vanished people, the hundreds of weapon sockets, and he felt something he had not expected to feel toward the most dangerous thing he had ever met. He felt sorry for it. Then I will help you find the voice, he said. I do not know how, but I will help you look. That was the promise that changed everything, though neither of them knew it yet. They did not have to look far. Because while Lastor slept, the human voice had not vanished from the galaxy entirely. It had only been hidden and scattered, and very nearly erased, by the very thing Lastor was built to fight. The Hush had been hunting humans for 400,000 years. Orun learned this slowly, from the records Lastor carried, and from the things they found as they traveled. After the humans went away, the Hush had crept back, and it had understood, in its careful, patient way, that the great danger to its empire of forgetting was not human ships. It was human voices. The humans, before they left, had seeded their descendants and their allies and their friends across 1,000 worlds, ordinary people carrying ordinary lives, and in the throats of a scattered few of them ran the old voice, the living tongue, the key that the warships were built to obey. The Hush could not find the ships. They were too well hidden. But it could find the voices. And so for 400,000 years, the Hush had moved through the galaxy quietly, world by world, unvoicing, erasing the old tongue from the few who still carried it, making them forget the songs of their grandmothers, cleaning the human voice out of the galaxy one throat at a time, so that even if a warship ever woke, there would be no living voice left to command it, and it would wait forever, alone, useless, asleep at the edge of the dark. It had very nearly worked. Orun thought about his own clan as the ship explained it. He thought about the planting songs his grandmother had hummed over the ration garden, songs whose words even she had not fully understood, songs she had said her own grandmother taught her, and that were older than the clans coming to the Reach. He had never wondered where those songs came from. They had simply always been there, like the stars. Now, sitting in the heart of an ancient warship, Orun felt a cold prickle move up his spine, because he was beginning to wonder, for the first time in his life, whether the songs of his own grandmother were as ordinary as he had always believed. He pushed the thought away. It was too large, he was not ready for it yet. "How many are left?" Orun asked, when he understood. "How many voices?" Last Door was silent for a long moment, running its vast old senses across the galaxy, listening on bands no one else used. "I hear 3, it said at last. "Across all the dark, 3 throats still carry enough of the old voice to wake a ship like me. 3. There were once 10,000 worlds of them. Now there are 3 throats, on 3 worlds, and the hush is moving toward all 3, because the hush felt me wake, and the hush is not foolish. It knows what my waking means. It knows that somewhere there is a voice that could command me, and it will reach those 3 throats and clean them, before they ever learn what they are. And then I will be alone again, forever, with no one left who can tell me the war is over." Orun felt the cold of that settle into him. "Then we go to them. We go to the 3. We get there first." "Yes," said Lastor, and then, gently, because it had grown to like the honest young thing that had woken it, "But understand what you are choosing, small one. The hush is moving against all 3 at once, and you have 1 ship, and 1 life, and 1 chance. If we go to the wrong one, the hush will reach the others first, and the voices will go quiet, and the door will never close. We must choose, and I cannot choose for you, because my builders did not give me the right to spend lives. I can only fight. You must point me." Orun Sef, 19 years old, salvage tech from a clan no one had ever bothered to remember, sat in the heart of the oldest warship in the galaxy, and understood that the most important choice in 400,000 years had just been handed to him. He almost broke under it. He was not a captain. He was not a chosen one. He was a boy who had cut a hole in a moon to feed his family. But Lastor waited, patient as it had always been, and somewhere in the dark, 3 throats carried the last of a vanished voice, and the smooth gray ships of the hush were already moving. "Tell me about all 3, Orun said. "Tell me everything, and then I will choose." So Lastor told him. The first throat was on a rich world, deep in the heart of a great empire, well guarded, hard to reach, and the hush would have to fight a whole defense fleet to reach it, which meant they had time. The second throat was on a quiet farming moon, with no defenses at all, soft and open, and the hush could reach it in 2 days. The third throat was the strangest of all. It was not on a world. It was moving, traveling between stars on a slow colony ship, a vessel full of refugees from a world the hush had already unvoiced, people who did not know that one among them carried the last clear strain of the old human tongue. They did not know what they were. They only knew they were running. Orun sat with the 3 choices for a long time. He was 19, and he was being asked to decide which of 3 throats in the galaxy would be reached in time, and which would go quiet forever, and the weight of it pressed on him like the crust of the moon he had cut his way out of. He thought about each of the 3, the rich world deep in the empire, well guarded, where the hush would have to fight a fleet to reach its voice. The slow colony ship of refugees, full of people already running, who carried the voice without knowing it, and the farming moon, soft and open, and 2 days from a gray death, where an old woman sang a song she did not understand. He almost chose the rich world because it sounded the most important, and he was young enough to think that important things mattered more than soft ones. But Lastor had taught him something on the voyage, without ever meaning to teach it, and the lesson rose in him now. The galaxy was full of powers that protected the strong and spent the weak. That was the whole arithmetic the hush ran on, and the whole arithmetic his own clan had run on in its hard seasons, and the whole arithmetic that had nearly ended the humans before they learned to refuse it. If he chose the rich world because it was guarded, and let the soft one die because it was easy, he would be doing the hush's arithmetic for it. He would be deciding that the well-defended voice was worth more than the defenseless one, and that, he understood, was exactly the kind of choosing the humans had built Lastor to refuse. "The second," Orun said. "The farming moon. No defenses. 2 days. The hush will go there first, because it is the easy kill. So we go there first too, and we get there before them, and we do not let them have it." Lastor was quiet a moment. Then, with something that might have been pride, "You think like my builders did. They also went toward the weakest, because the strong can wait, and the weak cannot. Set the course, small one. I will hold the door. The hundreds of weapon sockets along the ancient hull pulsed once, slowly, like a held breath. Last door turned its scarred prow toward a small farming moon at the quiet edge of an empire that did not know it existed, and began to run, faster than anything the galaxy had built in 400,000 years, toward a fight that the Hush did not yet know it had already lost. Far ahead, the smooth gray ships were already in the farming moon sky. The farming moon was called Ressa, and its people did not know they were about to be forgotten. There were 40,000 of them, spread across a green crescent of terraced fields, growing pale grain under a borrowed sun. They had no fleet. They had no weapons larger than the tools they used to clear stones from their soil. They had never been worth conquering, and so no empire had ever bothered them, and they had lived for 9 generations, in a quiet so complete that they had forgotten quiet could be dangerous. They did not know that one old woman among them, a grandmother named Telu, who sang the planting songs every spring, in a tongue no one else could quite follow, carried in her throat the last clear strain of a voice that had once commanded the warships of a vanished people. The Hush knew. The Hush had come to take it from her. Orun watched Risa grow from a green point to a green world on the skiff's old display, and he tried to understand the people he was racing to save. They had no idea, the ship had told him. That was the part that hurt the most. For 9 generations they had sung the planting songs, and never once known that the songs were a key, that the strange tongue threaded through them was the last living strain of the oldest voice in the galaxy, that an empire 4,000 years old was creeping toward them across the dark to take it. They were not heroes waiting to be called. They were not a hidden remnant keeping a sacred trust. They were farmers. They had forgotten the meaning of their own songs so completely that they were going to be erased without ever learning what they were. And that, Orun thought, was the cruelest part of the Hush. It did not just kill. It made sure its victims never even knew they had been worth killing. 6 smooth gray ships hung over Ressa's only town when Last Door fell out of the dark above them. Orun, watching from inside the ancient hull, saw the whole thing at once, the way you see a disaster you cannot stop. The 6 Hush ships had already begun. A soundless wave was spreading down across the terraced fields, and where it passed, the people in the fields went still, and then they looked at one another, with the lost mild confusion of those who have just forgotten something, and cannot remember what. The Hush was unvoicing them. It was cleaning the planting songs out of 40,000 throats to be sure of reaching the one that mattered, the way a careful thief burns a whole house to be sure of the one room. By tomorrow, the people of Ressa would not remember that they had ever sung. By tomorrow, Grandmother Telu would open her mouth in the spring and find that the old tongue was simply gone, and she would never know it had been taken, and she would never know that it had been the most important sound left in the galaxy. They had arrived with almost no time to spare. Last Door had run for 2 days at a speed that bent the dark around it, faster than anything the galaxy still remembered how to build, and even so, the Hush had gotten there first, because the Hush had not had to find the moon. The Hush had always known where the soft voices were. It had spent 4,000 years making a map of every throat in the galaxy that still carried the old tongue, and it had been moving toward Ressa, not for days but for years, patient as a tide, certain that no one would ever come to stop it. The Ceph would have called that certainty wisdom. Orun, watching the gray ships at their quiet work below, called it the thing that was about to kill them. Last Door did not announce itself. It did not give a warning. Its builders had not made it for warnings. It came down out of the dark with its scarred prow first, and its hundreds of weapon sockets already lit, and the first the Hush knew of it was when 2 of their 6 ships stopped existing. The remaining 4 broke apart, and turned to face the impossible thing that had appeared above the moon they were so quietly cleaning. And here, for the first time, the Hush did something other than flee or erase. It fought. It had felt Last Door wake. It had been hunting for exactly this, and it had come to Ressa prepared, because the Hush, whatever else it was 4,000 years old, and had not stayed alive by being foolish. The 4 gray ships did not aim their unmaking waves at Last Door's hull. They had already learned, in the dark beyond the dead moon, that the ancient ship could not be unmade. So instead, they aimed the waves down. At the moon, at the 40,000. They spread the soundless erasure wide and fast across the terraced fields, and the meaning of it was perfectly clear, a threat as old as war itself. Defend us, or we erase them. Every second you fight us is a second we are wiping their names from the universe. Come and stop us if you can, but we are faster at unmaking than you are at killing, and there are 40,000 of them, and only so many of us, and we will trade our deaths for their forgetting, and call it a victory. Orun understood the trap in the instant it closed, and his blood ran cold. He had grown up on a clan that survived by counting, by weighing one loss against another, by knowing exactly what could be saved and letting the rest go. He had seen the elders make that arithmetic during a bad season, choosing which fields to water and which to let die, and he had understood that the choosing was the price of staying alive. The Hush was offering Last Door that same arithmetic now. Save the 4 ships, or save the 40,000. You cannot do both. Choose, the way every sane thing in the galaxy chooses, and whatever you choose, we win something. Orun's hands were shaking on the controls. He did not see how the ship could win. He did not see how anyone could. It was a clever trap, and it was built on a single wrong belief. The same wrong belief that had killed 11 Hush ships in the dark, and would kill far more before the day was done. The Hush believed that Last Door would be forced to choose between killing the 4 ships and saving the 40,000, to choose between the mission and the people. The Hush understood the galaxy as a place of trades, of losses balanced against gains, of one thing always sacrificed for another. That was how the Hush had survived 4,000 years. It always made the trade. Last Door did not make trades. Orun felt the ancient ship's attention split, and split again, and again, faster than he could follow, until it seemed to be everywhere at once. The hundreds of weapon sockets did not all fire at the 4 gray ships. Most of them turned downward, toward the moon, toward the spreading waves of erasure, and Orun cried out, certain that the ship was about to fire on the very people it had come to save. It did not fire on them, it fired around them. Across the terraced fields, in the same instant, hundreds of precise beams of pale blue light came down, and each one struck not a person but a wave, meeting the Hush's soundless erasure in the air above the fields, and unmaking the unmaking, canceling it, so that the wave broke apart before it could reach a single throat. Last Door was shielding 40,000 people one beam at a time, hundreds at once, faster than the Hush could spread its erasure, while at the same time it reached out with the rest of itself and took the 4 gray ships apart. The Hush had believed Last Door would have to choose. It was wrong. A human ship, built at the end of a war against forgetting, did not choose between its mission and the people. The people were the mission. Saving them was the door. There had never been a trade to make. The 4 gray ships died in the order they had spread their erasure, and the last of them, in its final second, must have understood at last what it had walked into, because it sent out one final pulse, a desperate scream on every band, a message back to the rest of the Hush across the galaxy. Orun's translator caught the shape of it. It was a warning. It was the Hush telling itself, too late, what the ancient ship was. It cannot be made to choose. It will save them all. Do not trade lives against it. The trade does not work. Then it was gone, and Ressa was quiet, and 40,000 people stood in their terraced fields and looked up at the vast scarred shape hanging in their sky, not understanding what had nearly happened to them, not understanding that they had almost been forgotten, knowing only that a moment of strange confusion had passed, and that the planting songs were, somehow, still in their throats. Grandmother Telu still had her voice. Orun watched the people of Risa stand in their fields below, blinking up at the cleared sky, and he understood that they would never know how close they had come. That was the strangest mercy of the whole thing. They had nearly been unmade, all 40,000 of them, their songs and their names, and the very fact of them scrubbed from the universe. And because Last Door had been fast enough, and certain enough, the danger had passed over them like a shadow they never saw cast. They would go back to their grain. They would tell each other, maybe, that there had been a strange light in the sky, and a moment of dizziness, and then they would forget even that, and they would never know that the most important fight in 400,000 years had been fought directly above their heads, to keep them exactly as ordinary as they had always been. Orun thought that this too was the human way, as Last Door had described it. To fight so that strangers could go on being strangers. to spend everything so that the saved would never even have to know they had been in danger. Orun and Lastor found her, not by searching, but by listening, because the moment the hush's waves were broken, the old woman, frightened and not knowing why, had begun to sing. It was the planting song, the spring song, the one she sang every year, the one no one else could quite follow. And it was the old tongue, the living voice, the first clear strain of it that Lastor had heard in 400,000 years. The ancient ship went absolutely still. Orun had never felt anything like it. The whole vast hull, which had broken a moon and erased 11 ships and shielded 40,000 lives, went silent and motionless, every system holding, every weapon dark, all of its ancient attention bent down toward one old woman in a field, singing a song she did not know the meaning of. For 400,000 years, Lastor had waited for a human voice, and here, at last, faint and cracked, and carried on the wind of a farming moon, was the sound it had been built to obey. "That is it," Lastor said, and its great old voice shook in a way Orun had never heard. "That is the voice. After all this time, that is the voice." But Grandmother Telu was old and frightened, and did not know what she was, and could not command a warship. She could not tell Lastor that the war was over. She did not know there had been a war. She could only sing the small piece of the old tongue that her grandmother had taught her, and her grandmother before, passed down through 9 generations of farmers who had no idea they were carrying the last key to the oldest weapon in the galaxy. Orun listened to her sing, and felt his eyes sting. He did not know the words, neither did she, but under the cracked old voice and the strange forgotten tongue, there was something he did know, something that crossed every distance between his species and hers, and the vanished one whose song it truly was. It was the sound of a thing planted in hope. A planting song is always a wager on a future you will not be sure of, a thing you sing over seed in the cold ground, because you choose to believe the spring will come. Grandmother Telu did not know she was singing the oldest weapon key in the galaxy. She thought she was singing to her grain. And in a way that even Lastor's 400,000 years had not worn away, she was right, because the song had always been both, a thing that asked the future to be kind, and a thing that armed the ones who would make it so. It was enough to prove the voice still lived. It was not enough to close the door. "She does not know the words of release," Lastor said quietly. "She knows only the song. The song is the proof. But to tell me the war is over, to let me finally rest, a voice must know the words my builders left, and those words have been forgotten. They are gone from her line. They may be gone from all 3 throats. They may be gone from the galaxy entirely." The ancient ship was quiet a moment, and the hush knows now where she is. It heard her sing, the same as I did. It will come back for her with everything it has, because she is the last open door, and the hush has spent 4,000 years closing doors. Orun looked down at the green crescent of Ressa, at the 40,000 who did not know what they were, at the one old woman singing in a field, and he understood that saving her once had not saved her at all. It had only marked her. The hush would come back, not with 6 ships, with all of them, and it would not aim at Lastor this time. It would aim at Risa, at 40,000 throats, and it would not stop until the song was gone. "Then we hold," Orun said. "We hold Risa. We hold the door." "Yes," said Lastor. And for the first time since Orun had woken it, the ancient ship sounded not patient, not weary, but glad. "We hold the door. Set me above them, small one. Let them come. I have waited 400,000 years to do the one thing I was built for, and I will not be too late for it now." The hundreds of weapon sockets along the scarred hull began, slowly, to fill with light. And far across the dark, on every band the hush used, a great quiet empire of forgetting turned all of itself, at last, toward one small farming moon, and one old woman's song. The whole of the hush came to Ressa, and it came in silence, because silence was the only voice it had ever had. Orun counted them as they fell out of the dark, and the counting took a long time. 240 smooth gray ships, more than he had known existed, the gathered strength of 4,000 years of forgetting, every vessel the hush had been able to call across the galaxy, drawn to one farming moon by the sound of one old woman singing. They did not form a battle line. They formed a wall, They spread themselves across the sky above Risa from edge to edge, a gray ceiling between the moon and its borrowed sun, and the light that reached the terraced fields below grew dim and cold, and the 40,000 looked up and were afraid, though they still did not know why. Last Door hung alone between the gray wall and the green moon. One ship, scarred, ancient, lit from within, 240 against one. Orun looked at the count on his display and felt the old clan arithmetic rise in him one last time. 240 was not a number a single ship could fight. It was not even a number a single ship could survive. Every instinct his grandmother had ever planted in him said the same thing, the thing the Ceph had always said when the strong came for the weak. Run, stay small. Be unimportant, let it pass. He waited for Last Door to feel it too, to weigh the wall against itself and find some clever way to slip aside, to save what could be saved and let the rest go, the way every sane thing in the galaxy would. Last Door did not weigh anything. That was the thing Orun finally understood, watching the ancient ship hold its place between 240 enemies and the people it had come to keep. It was not brave the way Orun's stories meant brave, not a thing overcoming fear. It simply did not contain the arithmetic at all. The trade the whole galaxy lived by, the weighing of one life against another, had been left out of it on purpose, by builders who had learned, in the worst war ever fought, exactly where that arithmetic led. Last Door could not be made to choose between the mission and the people, because it did not know how to think the thought. To it, there was only the door, and the door was held, or it was not, and 240 was simply the number of things that were about to learn the difference. The hush did not speak. It had said everything it had to say in the dead ship's final scream above Ressa. It cannot be made to choose. It will save them all. So the hush did not try to make Last Door choose. It tried, instead, to overwhelm the choice entirely. 240 ships could spread 240 waves of erasure, all at once, across every throat on the moon, faster and wider than any single ship could shield. The hush had done the arithmetic. One ship could cancel hundreds of waves. It could not cancel 40,000. The hush would simply pour out more forgetting than Last Door could break, and somewhere in that flood, Grandmother Telu's voice would go quiet, and the door would close forever. It was a good plan. It was built, like every hush plan, on counting. On the certainty that enough was enough, that 240 was a larger number than one, that the galaxy was a place where the bigger number won. Orun, inside the ancient hull, felt Last Door begin to laugh. He had not known a ship could laugh. It was not cruel. It was almost kind. It was the laughter of a thing that had waited 400,000 years for exactly this, that had been built for exactly this, that had finally, after an age of sleeping, found the one fight it understood completely. They are counting, Last Door said. They have always counted. That is why they lost the first war, and that is why they will lose this one. They believe that 240 waves are more than I can break. They are right. I cannot break 240 waves. The ancient ship's hundreds of weapon sockets flared to a white so bright that Orun had to look away. So I will not break the waves, small one. I will break the ships that make them. The wall they built to drown one voice has gathered all of them in one place, in front of one gun, for the first time in 4,000 years. They have spent an age hiding from each other in the dark, unmaking one world at a time, so that no one would ever see enough of them at once to fight back. And now, to silence one song, they have done the one thing they never dared to do. They have come together. They have made themselves a target large enough that even an old ship cannot miss. The hush released its waves. 240 soundless erasures fell toward Ressa all at once, a flood of forgetting wide enough to clean every throat on the moon. And Last Door did not raise a single beam to break them. It fired upward instead. The hundreds of weapon sockets along the scarred ancient hull spoke together, all at once, in the loudest voice the galaxy had heard in 400,000 years, and the gray wall came apart, not ship by ship, not in the patient one-at-a-time way. Last Door had killed the 11 in the dark. All at once, in a single overwhelming hammer of pale blue light, the ancient ship struck the entire wall of the hush, in the instant before its waves could land. And where there had been 240 smooth gray ships, there was suddenly a sky full of light and breaking metal, and the dying scream of an empire that had spent 4,000 years being certain it could not be seen. The waves of erasure, their makers gone in the same instant they were released, fell to nothing in the cold air above the fields. Not one of them reached a throat, not one song was lost. Grandmother Telu, in her terraced field, never stopped singing, because she never knew there had been anything to stop for. Orun thought, in the silence after, about what the hush had actually done to itself. For 4,000 years it had survived by never gathering. It had moved through the galaxy as scattered gray ships, one here, two there, each one cleaning a single world, and then vanishing into the dark before anyone could count them, so that no power in the galaxy had ever seen enough of the hush in one place to believe it was real. That scattering had been its armor and its secret, and the whole shape of its long success. And in the end, it had thrown all of it away. To silence one old woman's song, to be sure of closing one last door, it had called itself together for the first and only time in 4,000 years, the entire empire of forgetting, drawn into a single sky, in front of a single ship, made at last, large enough to be seen, large enough to be counted, large enough to be ended. The thing that had won by never being a target had made itself, in its last hour, into nothing but target. Last Door had not had to find the hush across the wide dark, one ship at a time, over centuries it did not have. The hush had found Last Door, and brought all of itself, and stood still. When the light faded, the sky above Ressa was empty of gray. 240 had come, none remained. The whole gathered strength of forgetting, drawn out of the dark by one old woman's voice, and broken in a single breath by the ship, that voice had been carried 9 generations to wake. Orun sat in the heart of Last Door and could not speak. Below him, the borrowed sun came back through the cleared sky, and warmth returned to the green crescent of the moon, and 40,000 people who would never understand what had happened to them lifted their faces to the light and went back to their fields. For a long moment, Orun simply sat and breathed. He had watched a single ship break the gathered strength of 4,000 years, and his mind kept circling the same impossible fact, unable to land on it. The hush had been the quiet terror of the galaxy. It had unmade 1,000 peoples. It had crept through the dark for 40 millennia, taking names, until the galaxy itself had grown quieter, until whole regions of stars held worlds that did not remember they had ever sung. Every power Orun had ever feared, every empire his clan had stayed small to avoid, had feared the hush more, on the rare occasions they let themselves know it existed at all. And it was gone, not driven back, not weakened. Gone, in a single breath, above a farming moon no one had ever heard of, by a ship that had spent 400,000 years asleep in a rock, woken by accident, by a boy who had only wanted to cut some iron. He thought his grandmother would not have believed it. He thought, with a strange ache, that he could never tell her, because telling her would mean explaining the song, and he was not ready yet to learn what the song in his own family meant. It was not entirely a victory without cost. The hush, in its final overwhelming flood, had not aimed only at the moon. Some small part of its erasure, in the last instant, had touched Last Door itself. Not the hull, which could not be unmade, but something deeper, the long memory the ancient ship had carried for 400,000 years. Orun felt it as a kind of dimming. When the fight was over, and the sky was clear, Last Door was quieter, and slower to answer, and when Orun asked it a question about its builders, it was silent for a long, frightened moment, before it admitted that it could no longer quite remember the answer. "They reached me at the end," the ancient ship said softly. "Not my body, my remembering. I am losing pieces of it, small one. The names of my builders, the shape of the war, the sound of the world I was made on. It is going, a little at a time, and I cannot stop it. The forgetting touched me, and even I am not proof against it forever." Orun felt his hearts break. "Then we find help, we find the other 2 voices, we find someone who knows how to mend you. We—" "No," said Last Door, gently. "Listen to me, small one, because there is not much time, and there is one last thing I must do before the remembering goes. The words of release are gone from Grandmother Telu's line. But they are not gone from me. I still hold them, here, in the last of my memory. The words my builders gave me at the end, the words that mean the war is over and the door may close. I have held them 400,000 years, waiting for a human voice to speak them back to me. No such voice is coming. The line that knew them is broken. So I will do the thing my builders never imagined. I will give the words to you. I will teach the voice to one who was never born to carry it. And when the remembering finally takes me, you will hold the door. Orun wept then, openly, the way the young weep, without shame. I cannot. I am not human. I am not a captain. I am a salvage tech. I cut a hole in a moon. You cut a hole in a moon, Lastor agreed, for an honest reason. And you did not lie to me, and you did not run. And when I handed you the most important choice in 400,000 years, you chose to save the ones who could not save themselves. My builders looked for those things in a voice. The words are only words. It is the choosing that makes a voice human. You have a human voice, small one. You have had it all along. You only spoke a different tongue. Orun understood. Then, the last and largest thing the ship had been trying to tell him since the moment it woke. He had spent days believing that the human voice was a thing of the throat, a tongue, a set of sounds in the right order, a key cut to a lock. He had believed that because he was not human, he could never truly have it, that the most he could ever be was a finder of the real voices, a guide leading the ship from one human throat to the next. But the ship had been telling him something different all along, in everything it did, the unmaking wave it could not be touched by. The 40,000 it had refused to trade, the 240 it had not been able to weigh. The human voice was not a sound, it was a way of choosing. It was the refusal to do the arithmetic, the willingness to spend everything for a stranger, the insistence that the weak were not worth less than the strong. The words were only the lock. The choosing was the key, and Orun had been turning it since the first day, when he had been too honest to lie to a waking god, and too stubborn to leave it asking alone. So in the last clear hours of its long memory, the ancient ship taught a poor young salvage tech the words of release, the oldest words in the galaxy, the words a vanished people had left at the end of a war against forgetting. And it taught him more than the words. It gave him the other two voices, the world deep in the great empire, and the slow colony ship full of refugees, so that he could find them, and guard them, and gather the last living strains of the old tongue before the hush, broken but not entirely dead, could grow back and try again. It gave him the locations of the other ships, the other last doors, sleeping still in the dark across the galaxy, each one waiting for a voice. It gave him, in the end, everything it had, pouring 400,000 years of held memory into one frightened 19-year-old, before the last of that memory went dark. And then, when it had given him all of it, Lastor asked Orun to do the one thing it had waited an age to be asked. Speak the words, it said. Tell me the war is over. Let me close the door. I am so tired, small one. I have held the line 400,000 years, and the ones I held it for never came home. But you came. You are not the voice I waited for. You are better. You are the voice that chose to come. So speak the words, and let me rest. And I promise you the line will not fall, because you will hold it now, in a tongue your own grandmother sang, on a moon that will never know your name. Orun Sef wiped his eyes, and steadied his voice, and in the old tongue the ancient ship had taught him, in his own small clan dialect underneath it, he spoke the words of release. He told Lastor that the war was over. He told it that it had held the line, that it had not failed, that the ones it waited for had not come home, but that a new one had, and the door was closing, and it could rest at last. The hundreds of weapon sockets along the scarred ancient hull dimmed, slowly, one by one, in the patient way the ship did everything, until the great vessel hung dark and quiet above the green moon. The pale blue veins of light that had filled the hull when it woke ran cool and went out. Lastor, the oldest warship in the galaxy, having waited 400,000 years to be told it could stop, finally stopped. It did not die. Orun understood that later, when he had stopped weeping. It slept. It had not been destroyed, only released, set down at last from a watch no living thing should ever have had to keep so long. He left it there, in orbit above Ressa, where the 40,000 who would never know its name could see it in their sky, and call it the Gray Star, and tell their children it had always been there. He took the skiff he had come in, which Lastor had carried safe through every fight, and he flew out of the Risa system alone, carrying in his throat the oldest words in the galaxy, and in his memory, the map of every sleeping ship and every living voice still left in the dark. He was 19 years old. He had come to cut iron. He left as the only voice in 400,000 years that the warships of a vanished people would answer, and the keeper of a door an entire galaxy had forgotten was even there. Before he left the Ressa system, Orun did one more thing. He flew the skiff low over the terraced fields where Grandmother Telu lived, and he opened his comm, and he played for her the planting song his own grandmother had sung over the ration garden of a clan no empire had ever bothered to notice. He did not know, when he began, whether the two songs would have anything to do with each other. They came from different ends of the galaxy, from peoples who had never met, separated by a distance no story crossed. But as the old woman's recorded voice and his grandmother's remembered one rose together in the skiff's small cockpit, Orun heard it, the same thread running under both, the same forgotten tongue worn smooth by generations of mouths that did not know what they carried. His grandmother had been a voice too. The Ceph had been one of the scattered lines all along, hidden by their own smallness, protected by the very unimportance Orun had spent his life resenting. The hush had never come for them, because the hush had never noticed them, and so the song had survived in his family for 900 years, waiting, the way Lastor had waited, for someone to finally understand what it was. Orun wept again, but it was a different weeping this time. He had spent his whole life believing his clan was nothing, a small, unimportant people in a small, unimportant corner of the dark, worth nothing to anyone. And it turned out they had been carrying, all along, without knowing it, a piece of the most important thing left in the galaxy. The unimportant ones. The overlooked ones. The ones too small to bother erasing. They had been the keepers of the voice, and they had never known, and that, Orun thought, was the most human thing of all. Far away, in 3 locked vaults belonging to 3 empires that hated each other, the alarms that had begun to ring the day Lastor woke had gone silent again. The great quiet powers told themselves it had been nothing, a glitch, a ghost. They went back to their wars and their borders and their certainties, and not one of them ever learned that for a few days at the edge of the dark, an empire of forgetting 4,000 years in the building had been gathered into one place and broken in a single breath, or that the thing that broke it had not been a fleet, or a power, or a chosen hero, but one honest young salvage tech, and one old ship that had simply refused, for 400,000 years, to forget its orders. Orun Sef set a course toward the second of the 3 voices, the slow colony ship full of refugees who did not know what they carried. He had a long way to go. He had ships to wake and voices to gather, and a wound in the galaxy to mend, one throat at a time, against an enemy that had spent 4,000 years learning how to make the universe forget. But he was not afraid anymore. He had learned the thing the hush had never understood, the thing that had won a war 400,000 years ago, and had just won it again. The galaxy was not a place of trades, where the bigger number always won, and the weak were always spent to save the strong. It was a place where one honest voice, refusing to be silenced, refusing to run, choosing to hold the door for people who would never know its name, was worth more than 240 ships and 4,000 years of forgetting. He keyed his comm, and in the old tongue, quietly, to no one, to the dark, to the sleeping ships waiting in it, Orun Sef began to sing the planting song. And far behind him, above a small green moon at the quiet edge of the galaxy, the gray star kept its watch, and rested, and remembered nothing, and needed to remember nothing, because the door was held.